The following program is intended for an adult audience. It is separate from my work or that of any guest with any other entity. Welcome to the Education Upgrade Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Schulke. To support this podcast, please subscribe on YouTube and check out the links in the description. What were the larger ideas in the American Gestalt of the early 20th century? And how were schools and their grading practices a manifestation of those ideas? What were needs and problems that schools generally, and grades specifically, were intended to solve? Who defined those needs and problems? And what were deemed appropriate solutions? This informed understanding will challenge us with a crucial question. If any of those century-old ideas and beliefs are no longer accepted, should we continue to use grading practices on which they were based? That is from the book, Grading for Equity, What It Is, Why It Matters, and How It Can Transform School Classrooms by Joe Feldman, a book that I am continuing to study here on the podcast with Miss Morgan Torres-Unger. Hi, Morgan.
Hello. How are we?
Dude, I'm so glad you're here.
I'm so glad to be here. This was a little shorty chapter, but I liked it.
Yeah, well, thanks for being here on a work night and a school night.
Of course.
It is a big sacrifice of personal time, so thank you.
Anytime.
You're right, it is a shorty chapter. This chapter, it's shorter than, I think some of the history is fascinating.
Totally.
There's so much history of the origins of the U.S. education system, grading, how we came up with grading, who used what systems first, like all, and way before we had public schools, like universal public education, compulsory public education in the United States, like where did that come from? Did we just make it up? No, we did not. And that history is fascinating to me, but we're here to study a book.
Yes.
So this book, it seems like intentionally keeps it really brief, really to the point. It doesn't even talk about where did we get this idea for compulsory education from. Mm-hmm. It just says we started doing it and how did we do it and why. Mm-hmm. And lays out a few some understanding of like this 20th century context, because really at the end of the 1800s, we got the idea that like we wanted public schools. And the early 1900s is when they really were like developed and brought everywhere. That kind of everywhere had public schools for kids, and it became more uniform. But like, what was going on in the U.S. at the time, and how did that shape the way public schools started, which is really basically unchanged since for over 100 years now. And that's what the book goes over, and like it's concise. I will say that it is concise. It is not verbose whatsoever. Gets right to the point about this is where we're at, this is what was happening, and that probably played into how schools were developed and why.
Totally.
Did anything, what stood out about the chapter to you the most, Morgan? We can go through some of the sections, but like, what would you like?
Just from where we started and kind of where we're at, seeing that there isn't a huge change was kind of horrifying to me. Putting it into kind of just that perspective of, I mean, we grew up with the same A, B, C, D, F grading scale. We didn't know any better. Mm-hmm. So in order for, us to take that third person approach of taking ourselves out of that kind of situation and saying, okay, well, what is this really doing? I hadn't done that before when I reflected on this, in this chapter. So as concise as it was, the information was still shocking to me, to where I was like, my goodness, okay. Like, of course we'll say, oh, this is a systemic thing, whatever, blah, blah, blah. It's the whole system, whatever. But truly understanding the system and what it is intending to do, naive of me to think that it was, education, just education for, math, science, history, ELA, all of that stuff. But to realize the purpose of it and what it was created for and how that purpose has slightly shifted. It was shocking enough to pay attention and try and do something different.
I totally agree. That's what the big thing I got out of it too. Like, there was no malice intended when they started the school system.
No.
Like, they literally thought, like, man, to be doing what we should be doing for our citizens, like public school for everybody, but also that is a vehicle for meeting the needs of our nation and where it's at as a global power. Like, what do we need for our nation's success with where our industry is at and where all the jobs are, like, which is kind of what we're doing right now.
Totally.
Like, right now, we're just starting to revisit these things because we're talking about these 21st century skills, the technology, skills that kids need. Like, they need to be literate in so many things that they didn't need to before. We're talking about it now, but we're trying to adapt this old system to work with these new different needs. And
it's exhausting.
Yeah, it's exhausting. And when really, like, it seems what we need, which we can totally go into more later. It's worth a whole series of episodes on, like, creative schools and
Totally.
Sir Ken Robinson and his work on creative schools. Like, but that's separate from the book. The book outlines really kind of briefly, like, succinctly, where were we at, and why are our schools this way?
Got it.
And yeah, so the first thing it talks about, the rise of manufacturing, and we're talking about, you know, the early 1900s. We're going from an industry where everybody's job is either farming or some kind of skilled craftsman kind of trade. You know, you either are a specialist in making or doing something, or you make food. And those were the only jobs, you know, other than very specific, like, lawyers and things existed. But that was the majority of middle-class work. It was like almost all American jobs.
Yep.
By far the majority of them. And then we go into the Industrial Revolution, and now fast forward to the early 1900s, and all the jobs are now in manufacturing. Like, the bulk of jobs are factory work. And the wage labor thing had never existed before. Like, we didn't have this thing where, like, a career job was a wage labor job. Like, no, you were, you know, like, everybody had, like, a like, wage labor job. Like, very few people had hourly jobs back then. And then we go to this thing where, like, yep, factory floor work for everybody. And the factories pressured this developing school system to get people ready for it, man. Hey, these are the places where your students are going to come work. Here's the skills we need them to have. So if you could get them ready for this, and this, they'll be really set up for a job. In fact, if you could figure out how smart they are and let us know beforehand, we can put them in either the smart people jobs or the not smart people jobs.
We'll put them where we think they fit, where they
Right.
fit best based on our tests.
Based on our tests. And so there were, you know, some progressive educators of the time, like, involved in helping develop this system. John Dewey, for one, like, definitely John Dewey was really involved in the development of the early education system. But even Dewey said things that, like, wouldn't apply to our education system now. Everybody at the time kind of was looking at the situation like, what skills do they need to have? And it wasn't about creative problem solving and things that we now know are super duper important. And, you know, we didn't have technological literacy and information literacy and things then, you know, so it was like basically being able to incorporate oneself into the wage labor system. They saw that as important, things like obedience and punctuality, that kind of thing. The book, in just a paragraph, talks about some statistics about migration and immigration. And that in that time, like there's a huge influx of people from all over the place into the United States. And so now the schools are full of people that not only need to get ready to work into factories, but they're from other countries, other cultures, other cultural practices, not necessarily acculturated to school, things that these factory employers wanted people to be good at. So that played a role too, as the schools took up a role Americanizing people, you know, which doesn't the book remark about that somewhere?
Definitely does. Yeah, towards that impact on schools, towards the end of that chapter. Americanize the diversity, unruly mass of immigrants, rural transplants, and the poor by preparing them with the discipline and habits that factories prized in its assembly line laborers.
Yeah. That's
Heavy.
that's heavy. It's heavy. And this is documented. It goes on right after that to say, in a document signed by 77 college presidents and city and school superintendents of schools in 1874, in the throes of the Industrial Revolution, the authors endorsed that schools should teach obedience and very specific skills. Quoting, great stress is laid upon 1, punctuality, 2, regularity, 3, attention, and 4, silence, as habits necessary through life for successful combination with one's fellow men in an industrial and commercial civilization. Whew. In that document, Harrison Doty is cited by TIAC.
Sit down and shut up.
Yeah, that's what schools were designed to do. Like, hey, show up on time every day, be quiet, do what you're told.
That's hard.
Yeah, like to look at that like, okay, that makes sense because that was a big part of doing shift labor kind of work.
Sure.
And it wouldn't have been something expressed if they hadn't been struggling with people to do that. So, I mean, I can only imagine like you're trying to run a factory and you have people that like don't really watch the time because they're kind of used to doing everything according to when the sun comes up and the sun goes down and when my day starts and ends.
They got their own little system.
You know, when the cows need to be milked, etc. And now you're trying to take people that are used to agricultural jobs or being self-employed or being, you know, an entrepreneur or a craftsman or a tradesman, and now I need you here at 7 o'clock, and you know
you're on my schedule now.
Right, exactly, because production's going to go down. So that makes sense. And then, so as we're developing schools to do that, we start getting this little bit of the very beginning of cognitive science as a field, like it was literally just developing. So we've got, you know, Pavlov, and this time he's mentioned in the book. You know who also was around this time that is not mentioned is Vygotsky.
Oh, yes. We love that zone of proximal
That
development.
zone of proximal development.
VPD, baby.
Yeah, but he was around this time, and he's not mentioned in the book, but he was, you know, he was the first one to come up with some of these terms like ZPD. And,
absolutely.
You know, first one to learn about the science of people learning. But we developed the school system before we even had a science of how people learn. Like, it came first.
So that wasn't the intention of those schools. No.
Well, it was the intention, but there was no science to back it up. Because we had schools before. We had one-room schoolhouses with the school marm that, you know, who's almost always exclusively a woman with high school level education that would do her best to educate a whole bunch of kids of a whole bunch of different ages in as diverse a set of things as she could. And it was part of the community to educate kids before they were like working age. And, you know, the book says that at that time, like the average school year was like 78 days long.
Dang.
And, you know, we're at like 180 average these days, 180 instructional days. And yeah, and the things the kids learned were pretty basic, you know, different things that anybody with a high school diploma could be able to teach.
Yes.
And that's where schools kind of were. So they existed, but it was all narrative report grading before that. If the teacher was going to tell the parents anything of the like however, small number of kids whom she was educating, she'd write out a letter of how they were doing on this, that, and the other thing. And there weren't percentages or rankings or A, B, C, D, F that didn't exist yet. And it wasn't until we started incorporating what we thought was really good new science about intelligence testing and behaviorism into schools that we started seeing letter grades, percentages, ranking kids in relationship to one another. Johnny is smarter than Judy. Judy is better behaved than Jimmy. Like, now we started to see that. But it was because the science of intelligent testing, like, had just begun. Like, oh, we can test people with a battery of different kinds of questions and figure out this thing called their IQ. And at the time, the scientists were like, oh, your IQ, it's pretty much determined at birth. Like, you're predestined to a track. So let's figure out your track and get you on your track. And the book talks about some of those tracks that like existed in university systems, public school systems, and like, oh, we're going to separate the top 20% from the middle 60 from the bottom 20. And you'll all actually go to different schools and get different kinds of training, not the universal access that we want for everybody now.
It's a little backwards then.
Yeah, because we know like these intelligence tests are not the end all be all of everything.
No.
It could give you insight into areas where somebody struggles, but
Totally.
It's not a predetermination.
No, it's a measurement of where we're at right at this moment.
Yeah. And so, yeah, if you see in a young kid a really high score, does that mean they can probably achieve really high thing? Probably. Probably.
If they want to.
If they want to. If your test is valid, reliable, not culturally biased.
Absolutely.
All those things. And, you
Good
know, a
luck.
lot. Yeah. And a lot of these tests were purported. I haven't looked at any IQ tests. I'm not a psychologist. I wouldn't know what I'm looking at. But apparently there was a little bit of cultural bias.
Yes.
They kind of perpetuated. And this was, by the way, when schools were segregated by constitutional law. Like, schools were segregated. When did women get the vote? This is the time.
Not early enough.
Not early enough. Not quite yet. Yeah, this is the time we're talking about, man. Like, this is before the Great Depression that we're talking about, that we invented schools and how to grade kids. So should we be basing stuff on that science? Is kind of this old science. That's not even to mention the behaviorism.
Yeah.
So Pavlov's dog. Anybody who's taken Psych 101 knows about Pavlov's dog.
Ding.
Yeah. He'd ring a bell while he fed his dog, and then he figured out that he could make the dog salivate just by ringing the bell. And then he learned about like, oh, you can like condition somebody's brain to respond to stimuli in different ways. There was this guy named John Watson in the middle who's mentioned in the book, but I didn't really know anything about before reading the book. But I knew about B.F. Skinner.
Yes.
And he was like operant conditioning. Like, we can condition you to do or not do whatever we want.
You want to modify behavior? I got a task analysis for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know more about Skinner than I do, but...
Yeah, Skinner. So the idea behind Skinner is that when we see a behavior that we like, we give it a reward so that it continues, that operant conditioning kind of style. And then if we are seeing a behavior that we don't want, we can have a, instead of that positive response, we can have that negative response of like the negative stimuli in regards to having that alarm clock that wakes us up, gets us up, that like, ugh, okay, I'll do it, I'll get up. And figuring out how to use both of those modalities to try and modify behaviors. So with rewarding as well as providing stimuli that might not be as pleasant at times, that will help with changing what we do based on how we feel.
Man.
And there's a lot of Skinner that's used with students that and individuals that have autism. Applied behavior analysis is straight with Skinner of using and again identifying those behaviors, and when we see a behavior we want, we reinforce it positively so that it continues.
And that's good.
Definitely.
Everybody knows, like, yeah, reinforce a positive behavior. Make sure you're reinforcing the behavior that you intend to. I was just thinking about some of the stuff like in my classroom, like stuff I've seen work and not work, and like, the carrot versus the stick.
Yeah.
And are you giving carrot for the right thing? Are you telling a kid, good job, you got the right answer? Or hey, I'm really impressed by your hard work.
Yes.
You had to work very hard to get to where you're at, and that's impressive. To like give a reinforcement that encourages the behavior we're actually seeking, instead of, you know, perpetuating a fear of doing it wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So sorry, I had a little side thought there.
Apologize never. The connections are always welcome.
Well, I think that's part of doing this podcast, like long form conversation, is cool stuff comes up. And it's all worth talking about. Like, yeah, we are here to study a book, but part of that is talking about, like, anybody who's going to study the book on their own or with a group of people, you should absolutely talk about whatever pops into your head and make it relatable to your own practice, your own experiences, that your students you have right now, the place where you work right now, and everything you've learned so far in your career. Because it is really, you know, like we talked about before, it takes work to change a belief. And it takes context for your brain to buy in and go, oh yeah, actually this does make more sense. Yeah. And you know what? It's okay that I was doing something different before, because I just was doing what I learned how to do. I think it's super important, though, going back to the chapter, to understand the history of where our school system came from.
Totally.
And where our grading system came from. Because the intro paragraph says, like, oh, we just accept grading as part of school, and it's always been this way. Why would it be any different?
Exactly.
What do you mean you don't do 100% A, B, C, D, F? Like, what? No, that's what everyone does in every class all the time at every school everywhere.
Always.
Because.
Thanks.
Right.
Bye.
Right. But we should have the ability to question that. Like, anywhere in science, anywhere in psychology, we scrutinize. Like, is the rating scale you're using valid? Are you actually rating that behavior or that whatever in a way that, are you measuring that in science? Are you measuring that using the right instrument? Is that instrument precise? Is it reliable? Is it actually made to do that? Does it do that? You know? And I think a lot of times with grading, like, you know, we're trying to pound nails with a screwdriver. Like, what is grading even for? It doesn't need to be for what it was invented for. Because I think we're doing that and we don't realize it. I think that's kind of the point of looking at the history, is like, it was developed this way in order to rank kids. Like, that's where the A, B, C, D, F comes from.
Totally.
Is this norm reference grading, where if we take all of the kids and we assume that their intelligence and their ability follows a bell curve, a normal distribution, and we force fit them all in there based on their score on some arbitrary set of tests or tasks or whatever. If we force them into a bell curve, can we separate them out into who's at the bottom and who's at the top and who's just kind of average? And that's what ABCDF was invented to do.
Totally.
And that doesn't sound like what I want to do for my kids.
No, I don't know the last time that you've ever, I mean, don't get me wrong, F's are not anything that I was super proud to receive, but anytime I got them, that's all I felt, was that I was the failure.
You're a fucking failure.
Just go home and go away.
Yeah, what a terrible feeling.
Yeah.
Such a terrible feeling.
Of the, I'm a failure here, there is no redemption, I am what I am there, and tomorrow we'll be moving forward with the next material, and that's just where I'm at with that.
And kids are triggered by that feeling.
100%. I am too, as a grown adult.
Like, you don't have to call them a failure. They will assume it.
And that's worse.
If they hear the word fail or the letter F or anything like that, immediately they just assume, like, oh, you're calling me a failure. You're saying I've failed.
Or that is not anything that is within my caliber of being able to accomplish. That is not the tools that I am made of, and I will not make that.
Right.
When you slap that on me, and then we move forward the next day.
And that's, if you're going to try to norm reference grade, especially our junior hires, man, like,
oof, man,
their work habits could be here today and a different total thing tomorrow. They behave differently from day to day and week to week, and you've got 7th graders right now. I've got 8th graders. And from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, they are a different species of creature. They're a totally different human being. Their brain operates on a different set of software. In 9 months, they become something else. And I'm sure that's true for every grade, right? They come in one way, they leave another way. I think my experience being limited to teenagers and young adults, I see it really drastically in the middle schoolers, because you do get like, oh, you haven't started puberty yet, and like, oh, you're a man, you have a mustache.
Yes.
Like
voice dropped and hello, you scared me. Hi.
Yeah, they really do like mutate and morph into a different thing, and their brains work totally differently. Pre-testosterone, post-testosterone.
So intensely.
Oh my God.
Whoa, bro.
Bruh. So those kids, man, in the throes of all the stuff they're going through, like, no, I don't need to put you in a category, because that category is not, there's no way for it to be valid.
Yeah.
Because you could be not given a darn about school this week, and with a few conversations and big brother talks, like, you could be one of my top performing students in a month. Easy. Game changer. Man, it makes me think, do you have kids in your head that like you've seen do turnarounds? I
am screaming from the rooftops, and they already know who they are. I'm already proud of you, babies. Good job.
Yeah, man.
Keep working hard.
Even this year, like we're what, 6 weeks into school or something?
Yep. I'm almost 2 months, but yeah.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah.
About 2 months-ish, and yeah, some kids are making big turnarounds in their work habits, their behavior. Some of it is, with I got 160 kids.
Dang.
You got them for 2 subjects, so you got half as many.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I've got. I think 150 something right now, 153. I don't know.
Dude.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot though.
That sucks to grade.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, I don't grade a whole lot of stuff. And they learn way more than when I was grading everything.
Isn't that incredible?
It's so incredible, man. Yeah. So incredible. Like, yeah, they really are. And their work habits are just totally, well, I mean, we'll get into that with the coming chapters, but yeah, they're especially, man, we're doing chapter 2, the history today, brief chapter. And like, I just want to peek right into the next chapter, chapter 3, part 2, the case for change. Chapter 3 is such a good chapter.
It is. It's a fatty chapter. It's a good one, though.
It's a bit like, that one's going to be a longer talk for sure. So yeah, hopefully other people book study and all. Yeah, give it a peek. Dive in. The book only gets better from here.
Really?
I think so. Man, so we've got manufacturing, a couple progressive educators helping to move things along, but limited by the science and understanding of the day. Like, pedagogy wasn't a word, Well, it was, but it wasn't like a science like we treat it now. Like, there's a science to the art of teaching and how your brain works and learns. Migration and immigration, intelligence testing and categorization, and now this behaviorism science. We can use schools to modify behavior. We can get you to sit in rows, face forward, be quiet, please.
Raise your hand.
Raise your hand.
Ask to go to the bathroom.
Ask for everything.
Ask to do human anything.
Right.
Ask to blow your nose.
Right. Permission to breathe, sir. Like,
granted.
Granted.
Graciously.
Yeah. Did you do your first 4 practice problems? You can breathe when you finish your first 4 practice problems.
Hold it.
Gosh.
Such a power trip.
Sorry, that was about to turn into a rant.
But, I could go on with it as well. If you hear yourself as a teacher and you didn't think that was funny, stop what you're doing.
Stop what you're doing.
You're the worst.
Like,
stop
what
it.
do you mean? Of course I make them ask to do everything.
Of course. Yeah.
Okay, man.
Trust them a little.
How much do you think that's helping your relationship with kids? Do they trust you if they're not allowed to act like people?
Those are the last people I want to ask anything.
Yeah, or even if you have that, like, I've got kids that ask all the time because they're kind of used to having to ask for things. And my answer is always like, yeah, of course.
Exactly.
Of course.
Like, dude.
Well, both the bathroom passes are going, oh, let me write you a paper pass, man. You don't, oh, I can wait. Like, well, dude, do you need to go? Like, can you get your work done if you're trying to hold a pee-pee?
Yeah.
Like, Can you do your work while you're doing potty dance, bro?
Sure.
Let me write you a pass, man. Like, go handle that. Like,
Are you going to come right back and do your stuff?
Right.
I'm not babying you anymore. Goodbye.
Yeah. And the conversation we don't need to have is like, hey, are you going out to get a break to text or check your Snapchat
Exactly.
or whatever? Like, I don't need to have that conversation with you. Because if you're a human being, by me treating you that way, you're going to rise to meet that behavioral expectation most of the time, except in cases where you just like mentally can't.
Yes.
And in that case, like, well, that kid needs a break, man.
Well, we got to meet you where you're at.
Yeah. Like, I'm not going to be able to fight you into learning.
No, we're not going to do that.
No.
And you don't learn from people you don't like.
Yeah. So the amount to which we still behaviorally condition kids, I mean, to have our class sizes as overpacked as they are right now,
Yeah.
like, you do need some behavioral norms, right? Like,
Sure.
guys, we're
Got to
all
control
here.
the masses here.
Yeah, there's 30 of you in a classroom designed for about half of that, and we're packed in here. And guess what? You guys all want to play,
Yep.
and I want you to have the opportunities to play, but also we have to do school too.
Yeah, we got to get stuff done.
So how can we find a good mix of that? Like, what can I expect of you? Like, what do you think I need you to be able to do so that everybody can, I'm a teacher. I'm supposed to teach at some point something. So do you think I need to talk to the whole class sometimes and have everybody be able to hear me? How are we going to get there? What kind of systems can we have?
I wonder what teacher retention was like back then.
Oh, man.
You know what I mean? Are you having that much control and that expectation of just they sit down and listen? I don't know. I haven't looked into it, but the conversations that we're having and that we're thinking about, I don't think are the same conversations that educators were having.
I want to know. I really do. It'd be really valuable to just talk to some retired educators. Those would be really good episodes to do. Like, what was it like 30 years ago when you started teaching versus your last year?
Yep.
What were the biggest differences? Yeah.
It's solid.
Because that could like shed some light on this whole topic of like history and the progression of the system. And, the society has changed. Culture has changed. The kids have changed. Everything's changed except the way we do school. We're doing school the same way we were doing it when we started the first school, like in the public school.
Pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, we're having the same school.
Yeah, that's insane.
Which, I mean, that's a whole different beast in itself. But we're doing the same thing with so many different things that have happened in our world. And it's not perfect and it hasn't been perfect.
Right.
Where's the modification?
Yeah.
When's it coming?
We're just... Have you seen that TikTok with like the child's toy and the guy's like, where does this one go? That's right, it goes in the square hole. Where does the round shape go? That's right, it goes in the square hole. Where's the rectangle go? In the square hole.
Again.
Square hole again.
It all fits, right?
Yeah. And then I think that's what we're doing. We're going, yeah, we're putting round peg in the square hole, and it went in, right?
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
That works too.
That works too. And we're kind of... Do you think the system's just too... It's like trying to undo the DMV, Like, how can you... Hey, the DMV doesn't
Reinventing
work.
the wheel?
We need to redo the DMV. That'll never happen.
Yeah.
We need to redo public schools. They don't work. They don't work as well as they really could.
Yes.
If we kind of give it a do-over, like a real big makeover.
Yeah.
To like... Honestly... to like the core structures of them, of schools and districts and everything. Like, well, what are the schools supposed to do, and how do we group the kids, and what are classes like, and we're doing the same thing we did when everybody that went to public school was assumed that they were going to have a factory job, because if they were going to go to college, they'd be in a private school. It was just assumed.
Yeah.
If you're going to have an employer, then it's going to be industrial labor kind of job, and that's what the schools were designed for. And now we have kids going to public schools and we're like, oh yeah, you can be the president, you can be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, you can do all these things. But it's really exceptional situations and exceptional teachers that help those kids get there, it seems. Because talk to anybody successful and they either dropped out of the education system and figured it out on their own, every genius inventor ever, or... they had some awesome educators that went outside the lines and went above and beyond and mentored the shit out of them.
They met them where they were at.
Yes. Those are the only two. There's nobody who went through like, yep, I went through public education and my teachers were like all okay, and I never talked to any of them after 3 p.m. and none of them did anything extra for me, and I turned out great. I got this really great job now. Said no one ever.
Yeah.
Even you and me. And really our job's kind of middle class. And even to be doing as well as we're doing, there were educators that were exceptional. And that was the only thing that made school work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have an old system with new employees that, at least what I'm finding it with the teachers that are along the same kind of thread that we are and are thinking of, yes, we are trying to make, the next best scientist, but we're teaching how to be humans first. That wasn't a part of the curriculum before.
No. Well, it was assumed you got that at home,
The hope was, right? The expectation.
The hope was that you've got, a couple of parents at home, and one of them at least you see all the time, and you interact with both of them regularly, and you have family dinners at a table and speak to each other, and that's where you learn how to be a person. And that really is the role of a parent. It's their child. It's their discretion to decide what kind of person they think their child should grow up to be. It's, the parent's prerogative, because cultures are different, families are different, backgrounds are different. It shouldn't be the school's place. I'm fine as an educator knowing that, like, there are some universal things, like I can teach you how to be a good person, man.
Totally.
Be respectful, good thoughts, good words, good deeds. Yeah. What are your rules?
Number 1, you have to communicate. Rule number 2, you have to try your best. Rule number 3, don't be nasty. Then rule number 4, no paperwork for Miss Morgan. Whatever you do, damn it better not give me paperwork.
Those are good rules, man.
Keep it short and simple. Simple enough that my expectations are set of like, look, if I call on you, you can't pass in my class. It's okay that you don't know. Perfect. My job's to teach. Let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. How many kids don't know that like, hey, sometimes I ask a question I know you don't know the answer to. Sometimes the point is to see if anybody knows at all. Sometimes the point is to see if most of you know. Sometimes the point is just to make you think about something I know you don't know. I need you to be able to tell me, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. Have we learned that before? Was I absent that day? Or take a stab at it, man.
Yep.
Take a guess.
100%.
Yeah. Freedom to fail safely without embarrassment. Huge, huge, huge. I like those rules. I like the don't be nasty.
Don't be nasty.
Like,
you know what? That is a fan fave.
I bet.
I must say.
Do kids call each other out on it? You being nasty.
Straight up. They'd be like, dang, Miss Morgan, that was nasty. I'm like, ooh, that was filthy. Quit that. Get that out of here. No, not up in this space.
That's great.
Yeah.
And that's universal. Like, don't be, terrible to each other.
Yeah.
Treat other human beings with respect and love, period. ELE, everybody love everybody.
Plur. Peace, love, unity, and respect.
Yes, precisely. Those things we can do. In fact, I wouldn't want my kids to have a teacher that didn't make it obvious that those were expectations.
Agreed.
Because those are expectations for life. If you don't treat other human beings with respect, you are not going to be very successful in relationships or jobs or life at all. If you don't know how to communicate what you need and express your feelings and your wants and your opinions in a healthy way, that's not going to go very far.
Yeah.
Also, if you create the metaphorical extra paperwork for people,
oh man,
if you force me to treat you in a way that I do not want to treat you, I'm going to feel doubly worse about it. I'm going to have secondary emotions about that. I'm going to be upset with you, and then I'm going to be upset that I'm upset with you, which is not great, but it's also human.
It really is.
Like,
it's reflective.
Kids need to learn that there are things you do that upset people, and it's not a healthy way to live your life. It's not going to get you very far. We should want all these kids to know what it means to be liked and accepted, not to just be a jerk.
Preach.
Man, that's like 50% talking about the book and a little bit of ranting about what came to mind.
We love it here.
I don't think there's much more to say about this chapter. Like, I definitely want to do a couple episodes on history.
Yes.
Because there's really like 3 or 4 big chunks of the history of the U.S. education system that are worth going into.
Okay.
There's the Prussian model, the model on which we based our education system that came from Prussia, came from the people that like gave rise to the Nazi Party, and how they developed their education system in response to being a world military superpower for hundreds of years, and then all of a sudden not losing a big battle and being occupied by France for 8 years. And they were like, oh my God, we need to develop a school system that teaches everybody how to be a good soldier and not desert. Because we used to be called an army with a country, and now we're occupied by France. Not loving this.
We hate it here.
And then, so that's the first chapter, is like, just where did that system come from? And then we brought it over here. Horace Mann brought it over here. And then we tried it, and we did all the stuff that's in this book, the early 20th century stuff. That's in here. And that's probably the most important part, because that is where our system came from. But it's not the only part of the history of the education system. It's probably most important in regards to, like, why should we re-examine our grading? Because
it's the what, it's not the why.
Totally. And then the 2 other chunks, I would say, there's probably like early development of the education system on all of the legislation, like all the different acts of Congress that came about and really steered the education system in different ways. And I would say, like, probably up until the 70s or 80s, like, I don't know, probably like the 20s up through then. And then there's like the 80s until now. Because there's a whole bunch of new legislation in the last 40 years that has steered our education system in a bunch of drastic ways.
Definitely.
Sometimes for the best, sometimes arguably not. But man, those would be fun episodes to do with people that are experts in that stuff.
100%.
Yeah, so if you're an expert, holla.
Please.
Slide up in my DMs.
We're here for it. We are so open.
Yeah, I would love to have some people that are experts in that stuff come talk about it, because I'm by far not.
Me either. Math and science, thanks.
Yeah. The end of the chapter, every chapter has like a summary of concepts. So go buy the book, open the show notes for this episode, and please and buy the book.
Page 24.
Yeah, and go to page 24 for the summary of concepts and then questions to consider. And this chapter only has 2 questions, which is the other ones have several more to kind of facilitate a discussion, and it's really kind of set up for a book study.
Really is.
It totally is. It's made for you to like go through it and talk about it with people. So question 1, how do schools in the first half of the 21st century, their design, their purpose, their student, compare to schools in the first half of the 20th century? Morgue.
Well, I mean, when we're coming down to it, we're still using A, B, C, D, and F to rank our kids to jobs that we have way more of right now, way more of a variety of how our kids can be successful in the real world. And it is not through those very small avenues that were, predetermined at the beginning of that, at the beginning of the 21st century with that design. The difference here, I think, is the mindset that we have now that we know more and we know better. Getting a little Maya, know better, do better. So that's, I think, what we're trying to make the connections with, I think, as a whole in education. And I think that's why there's a lot of emotional struggles with a lot of teachers, because they're trying to, like, intrinsically figure this out. Like, I'm trying to, develop this myself. I'm trying to come up with this. I'm trying to piece this bridge together of why this is so difficult at different periods of time. But we're all fighting the same battle. It's redirecting our energies to kind of focus on what needs to change. So starting with that ranking scale, that being the same, that to me was enough to where I was like, okay, I'm done with that. Like, oh, okay, this is not how I want my kids to feel. I want them to know and have some sort of reflection of how much they understand the material. Absolutely. If they don't know very much of it, I need them to see that they don't know very much of that. But in that context of it being an F for failure, that heaviness does not need to be carried in to my lesson plan on whether or not we can multiply. Like it's bringing that step back of like, okay, you don't know how to multiply yet, right? That growth mindset. We got some Carol Dweck in here, and putting that into the general principle and foundation of how we do everything in our classroom without the condemnation of not knowing. So, I mean, I feel that those are the biggest differences, but starting from the same problems.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Sorry, my brain's just processing everything that you said.
No, you're totally
I love
fine.
that we do this unscripted. I also hate that my brain has to keep up with you.
I have to do the same thing. So I take my minutes of reflection as well. We cut those out, though.
Oh, I usually don't.
That's fine.
I think uncomfortable silence is good for people.
It really is.
Even to notice that, like, hey, uncomfortable silence is okay, and I don't need to edit it out of here. Like, if you can't stay tuned in for 2, 3, 4 seconds while I think about something, that's okay. That's okay. But I want it to be real.
I love that.
It really is supposed to be a conversation. That's what this whole thing's supposed to be. It's just conversations about things, not necessarily a lesson or a sermon or anything. Like, this is all worth talking about. That's the only way we get new ideas developed. It has to be a marketplace of ideas. We exchange ideas and thoughts. We go through whatever information we have. And hopefully just having a conversation and letting anybody listening be part of it provokes some more conversations. Because as big as the U.S. public education system is, and the way like most of it functions the same in a very regimentedly bureaucratic way, structured that way intentionally for good reason at the time it was developed, it's not something we can realistically hope to tear down and redo. We can't just not do school for a while we try to figure out how to do it better.
Yeah.
So we got to work with what we have.
We got to build the airplane in the air.
That's what we're doing. Got to rebuild the airplane in the air. We're trying to fly to Mars now. Our Orville Wilbur contraption isn't cutting it anymore.
Step up. We're on our way.
Yeah. So getting people thinking and talking is really the way to change it, because it takes thought leaders to make a change. And there are, I've heard of schools now and school districts that are making changes in grading based on this research. In fact, largely this book and others akin to it. And that's fantastic. But that means it'll be a while before it's like universally accepted. It'll be a generation, like really a bunch of people are going to have to leave the profession.
100%.
Like, I hate to say it, but that's what it takes.
Yep.
Because it's easy to get addicted to a belief or dependent on a belief or just be so into it that like, hey man, I've been doing it this way for so long. I don't have the energy to change my whole class syllabus and rewrite all of my tests.
I hear you. Peace out, though. You're all done. Sounds like you're all done. Because we're changing it up.
It has to be. When we finally know that like, hey, I know it seems uncomfortable, but we know that this ain't good. We know that like, did you know that you doing that one thing in the grade book, how do you think it affects kids' brains? How do you think it makes them feel? All good conversations to have. It sounds like you and I both had those conversations with ourselves in our head.
All the time.
And like, oh my God.
All the time.
What did I do? Did I just make disparity of access worse? Did I just make this less equitable by doing something as simple as a grading practice? did I give the kids that already have all the help in the world more help while punishing the kids that don't have the same resources as them?
What a disservice are all the things that I think of, like, ooh, gosh. But again, giving ourselves grace.
Giving ourselves grace.
We're putting in the work right now to be the best that we can be.
Totally. And you might end up being that teacher that, hey man, even if you have a small win. I had a kid, I told you earlier, write me a little letter that they had, I'm sure in their English class, they had to pick a teacher to write a little thing to, or whatever class. And I got a little note from a kid that was like, hey, science used to be my least favorite class. This year it's my favorite class.
I love that.
And I'm like, I don't, even if you don't go into a STEM career at all, like just the fact you've got a class, maybe it did open a pathway. Maybe you're going to, cure freaking cancer or something. I don't know.
Yep. More power to you.
Could be. Or maybe you just have one class where you don't hate being at school. Either way, man, win. Huge win. Infinite win.
Yep.
Like, maybe that gets that kid to not disengage from education at a pivotal age and stay invested in the things that they do love.
Absolutely.
You don't need to love science, man, but like learning something. Get passionate about something eventually. And I noticed like changing my grading from the historical stuff that I didn't know any better. I was doing the same stuff we were doing in 1920 whatever. I was doing that up until a year ago and thought it was exactly what I should be doing. Why wouldn't I do it? That's what every class I went to. Every class I had in school was that way.
It made sense to me.
Yeah.
At that time. Like,
absolutely.
Okay, don't get enough. Don't get enough. Don't get enough.
Don't get enough. Don't get enough.
Don't get enough.
Yeah. And rankings, like printing rankings of children and putting your percentage up on the wall and a printed ranking.
Oh my gosh, dude. Wow.
Remember that?
Just untapped that. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I remember those being posted in the back of the wall for everybody to go up and see.
Yeah.
Ours were by our numbers, but everybody knew everybody's number.
And people learn their numbers. And
quick.
People still do that. Post the grades by your student ID number.
Wow.
And, which of course weren't in numerical order, they're in alphabetical.
Of course.
order.
Of course.
But yeah, like I remember that. And I did well in most of my classes up until a certain point. So when I was younger, it was fine. But at the point where I disengaged from school, like if my teachers were doing that, I'm sure I didn't like it.
Oh, I shut down. I was a great student until I didn't know something, and then I'm not a student in that regard anymore. I'm done with that. Like that's, so toxic. La tóxica. But yeah, so this system helped facilitate that fear of failing.
Yeah.
Was a genuine, I'm still working through that as a grown adult of don't get enough, don't get enough, don't get enough. But,
Yeah.
let's change it.
Yep. When will it be enough? It will never be enough.
Never.
I think that's all we've got for this chapter, man. We could rant all night long.
Dang, and we would love it.
Oh, I do. Like, you're impassioned, I'm impassioned. Anybody that takes the time to listen is impassioned. Like, you care about your kids. You want to do the best job you can, and you're not afraid to look at your own brain and your own feelings and your own beliefs and go, man, is this working? Do I have data to show that it's working?
We're doing powerful stuff.
Powerful stuff.
Cheers, bud.
Cheers to you.
Cheers.
Call it there. There's that second question, but I think that second question, that is best left for people to read and answer by themselves on their own.
Yes.
It would be impossible for us to
personally reflect on that.
Yeah, to really sincerely personally reflect on it, especially in this format. So I think for other people to read that second question at the end of chapter 2 and talk about it with your coworkers where you work.
Totally.
That would be the best. People at your school that teach things similar to what you do. Other elementary teachers, other middle school teachers, other high school single subject teachers, other whatever. And
be honest.
Be honest.
Be honest. Don't hold it back.
Yeah.
Be honest.
Because look, every school, every district, every department of education, every individual teacher is doing the best they can with what they've got. And to change a system, to change a culture, takes a long, long, long time. And that's what we're asking. Change a belief, change a culture.
On our way.
Miss Morgan.
Sir,
Thanks
Mr. Schulke.
Dude, thanks for being here again.
Anytime. I love it.
I'm glad that you're committed to
fun.
doing this this book study together.
Yes, this is genuinely, I mean, like I've mentioned a few different times, this book rocked my socks this summer. So this is my year of transition, and it really helps to go through the material so that I'm, both reassured and then reinforced with everything that I'm doing.
It's making me feel way more knowledgeable about it, way more familiar with it. When people ask a question, like I feel like I have a real answer.
I can justify.
Yeah, like I've read the book enough, I can like flip to a page and go, oh yeah, man, you need to go to chapter 7 that talks about, mathematical accuracy of practices. And yeah, check that out. Can't wait till we have all the podcast episodes for all the chapters and people
that's gonna
can
be awesome.
People can reference that.
Skirt right through. Use what you
Skirt.
need.
All right, man. Thanks very much. Again, the book is Grading for Equity, What It Is, Why It Matters, and How It Can Transform Schools and Classrooms by Joe Feldman. Link in the description.
Toodles.
Thank you for watching and listening. We plan to bring you new episodes regularly to continue studying this book and others. To support this project, please subscribe on YouTube, follow on Spotify, and of course, we appreciate all of the likes, reviews, and comments on your favorite podcast platforms. You can also buy the book we're discussing and others using links in the description. Thank you again for your time and attention.